If you have a medium format camera and you're struggling with sharpness in your landscape photography photos, then this is the video for you. Welcome, my name is Stephen, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my technique for focusing and getting sharp landscape photography photos with cameras like this, my medium format cameras. Stick around, it's going to be a fun video. I'm going to give you some theory, and we're also going to go out into the field and put these techniques into practice. I really hope you enjoy the video. So I just want to let you guys know that the merchandise store on my website is filled with beautiful products for you to browse and purchase at your leisure. I'm really proud of the t-shirts that I've made. I've set up a brand called Navac. The t-shirts are made from 100% organic cotton. The illustrations are by me. They're essentially some of my best photos that I've managed to transform into stencil drawings, and they are printed directly to the garment. So they're quite high quality t-shirts. They're about $50 plus shipping. Go have a look, buy a t-shirt. It's a really easy way to support me and support this channel. Thank you very much. So over the last 3 years, I've been shooting medium format cameras. About 3 years ago, I moved into medium format photography. For my landscape photography work, I started off with a Mamiya 7, which is a 6x7 film camera. I then moved to the Hasselblad 503CW, which is a 6x6 film camera. And then I moved to the Mamiya 6, which is this camera here, which is also a 6x6 film camera, but this is a rangefinder. Focusing medium format cameras in your landscape photography can be challenging. I understand this from experience, and it comes down to two things. Mainly is the lens characteristics for these cameras and also the sensor size. Your camera position and the height of your camera in relation to your foreground interest are essential to consider, as are the lenses that you use, their minimum focus distance, and also their field of view in degrees. So if we could just digress for a minute on minimum focus distances. For example, this is my Fujifilm GFX 50S2, and on there is the GF 30mm prime lens, which is the equivalent of 24mm in the full frame format. Now, the minimum focus distance of this lens is, I think, 37 centimeters. Now, that doesn't mean that because we can put this camera at 37 centimeters from a subject, an item in the foreground, and it will give us sharpness from that point to the horizon, because it's just not realistic because of the lens. And we'll get to that in a minute because the type of lens is important to consider. So in terms of landscape photography, I don't think it's any secret that the photos should be sharp from front to back. Generally, that's the expectation. There are deviations from this, when you're trying to make your subject stand out and you want to use your shallow depth of field, and I do this and so do many other landscape photographers. But generally, about 75% of photos that I see and I do myself will have sharpness from front to back, because that is typically the standard for landscape photography, because you want the detail from front to back, because it's nice to look at the detail, obviously. So when we're making our landscape photography photos with our medium format cameras, it is essential to consider the lens characteristics for these cameras. For example, the GF 30mm prime lens for the GFX system is a 24 degrees field of view in 35mm format. However, the most important part to consider is that this is a 30mm lens. It is the design of this lens has all the characteristics of a 30mm lens, which means that you're going to get the shallow depth of field of a 30mm lens. Just to build on that a little bit further, my Mamiya 6 MF, this is the 50mm lens. It is a prime lens, and this has a field of view of 28mm, now in 35mm format. However, it's essential to consider that the design of this lens is a 50mm lens, and it will have all the characteristics of a 30mm lens. The only thing that makes these cameras different is the sensor size, and that's how we get the wider field of view. For example, 50mm being 28mm in 35mm format. And with the modern day digital medium format cameras like this one, 30mm is 24mm equivalent in 35mm format. So just to emphasize the point that I'm making here, it's unreasonable to expect the medium format lenses on these cameras to perform the same as a 35mm lens, because they are just not designed and built to do that. They have their own characteristics and they have to be used in a specific way. So how can we use these cameras to get the perfect sharpness in our landscape photography photos? Well, there are two ways of doing this. The first way is that you focus stack. You take a photo in the foreground, a couple of photos through the middle of the photo, and then one for the horizon, and then you stitch them together, and then you have the perfect sharpness from front to back. And that is the only way that you're going to get perfect sharpness with these cameras. Although you can't really do that with a film camera. So in the film days, what did they do? What did landscape photographers do when they only had film cameras? Well, they used the hyperfocal focusing approach. And we're going to go through that today. And I'm going to share with you my approach to using a hyperfocal focus approach. So what is hyperfocal focusing? Well, I have an illustration on my screen here. I'm going to put it up on your screen. And we're going to refer to this as we go through this. So for some extra context and to help our understanding of the hyperfocal focusing, there are a few different focusing scenarios here that we're going to talk through. So the first one is a camera that's set up and it has any lens and it's set to f2.8 and the focus point is on the mountain on the horizon. So at f2.8 you're going to get a very shallow depth of field, and in terms of my illustration here on the screen, we've got sharpness from the mountains and halfway through to where the trees are. So the next example is the green example, and we're at f8 and the focus point again is on the mountains, and this time because we've increased our aperture we've got a better depth of field, and now we've got sharpness from the trees to the mountains, but our very close focus, our near focus, is still not sharp enough. So at this point there are two options that we can use. One is to increase our f-stop to the highest point possible, and the second option is to use hyperfocal focusing. So the first option that we've got here is illustrated in the red, f22, and that will give us sharpness from the front right through to the back. However, we've got diffraction to deal with. So diffraction is a characteristic of light and how it bends round an opening. For example, an aperture f22, the light will bend round a small opening and it will diffract and it affects sharpness, essentially giving us a less sharp image. And the second option is to use the hyperfocal focusing, which is again illustrated in green. At this point we were at f8 and the focus point has now moved from the mountains to the tree, which is roughly halfway through the image, and that will give us acceptable sharpness from the near focus area where the plants are in the foreground there, to the tree and onto the mountains. And that's how we achieve sharp images using the hyperfocal focusing approach. So one important factor that you must consider when you're using your hyperfocal focusing is the distance from your camera to where you want your sharpness to start and where you want it to end, which is typically on the horizon. And I have a second illustration that we're going to refer to now that will help our understanding of this. So this is my 50mm lens from my Mamiya 6 MF camera, which is a 6x6 negative. And here you can see that we have our f-stop set to 8, and using the hyperfocal approach, we get sharpness from 3 meters to infinity or 10 feet to infinity. So obviously this setting is acceptable for when we want our sharpness to start at 3 meters or 10 feet and it runs to infinity. However, what if we want our sharpness to start at 2 meters? What do we do? Well, the only way that we can achieve that is to increase our aperture stop to f11 or f16. And in the example of my 50mm lens here, the only way that we can achieve that is by moving our f-stop to f16. And that will give us sharpness from 2 meters all the way to infinity, or 7 feet all the way to infinity. So that is how I focus my Mamiya 6MF film camera. But I've also got a Fujifilm GFX 50S too, and the application of the hyperfocal focusing is exactly the same. However, there is one problem with the Fujifilm GFX 50S2 and its lenses, and that is that it doesn't have the depth of field scale on the lenses like the Mamiya 6 film camera does. However, Fujifilm obviously know this because they built it into the in-body, and you can have a depth of field scale on the LCD screen on the back here. So it's really easy to use the hyperfocal focusing with the Fujifilm GFX cameras. On the back of the LCD screen here, we have the depth of field scale, and we simply set our aperture and adjust the focus until the blue area covers the amount of sharpness that we need from the near foreground to the horizon or anything else that you are expecting. And for example, here we are at f8, and I simply move and adjust the manual focus, or you can do this with autofocus as well, until I have my setting. And with f8, I've got sharpness from just before 5 meters, so 5 meters, all the way to infinity. If I increase it to f11, I can adjust the manual focus again, and this time I've got sharpness from 3 meters to infinity. If we go to f16, and I adjust my manual focus, and we've got sharpness from just under 2.5 meters all the way to infinity, F22. We've got from just over 1.5 meters to infinity, and F32, we've got just over 1 meter to infinity. So the closest you can focus with this camera and the GF 30mm lens and accept sharpness from front to back is when you have your camera focused approximately 1 meter from your near subject, and you will get sharpness from that point all the way to the horizon. However, at F32, you will experience some diffraction, so be fully aware of that when you are close focusing. So that's enough theory for today. Let's go out into the field of this Fujifilm GFX 50S2 and put the hyperfocal focusing approach into practice, and I will show you some real-life examples of using that approach. I hope you enjoy the images. So we have just found ourselves a nice little composition here. Here we have Mount Tarawera, one of New Zealand's most iconic volcanoes. Erupted in 1886, I think it was, and there was literally 3 plumes of lava that flew out of each of those 3 peaks there on the volcano. And this is Lake Tarawera, and I've been here before, I know this place really well. It's a beautiful place, beautiful lake. And here we have this tree, and I've just found a little composition I just want to try out. And we've basically got a tree that's sticking up here that's framing the mountain, and we've got some nice ripples on the water here. So we're going to frame it up with my Fujifilm GFX 50S2 and a 30mm lens, and we're going to set up now and take a photo. So what have we got here? We've got our 30mm lens on here. We're currently at f11. We've got optical image stabilization, well, in-body stabilization switched on, f11, ISO 160, and we're just focusing on the tree here. And I'm getting plenty of depth of field from this. It is in focus. Shutter speed is 25th of a second, so we don't even need a tripod here. So I'm going to try and get a little bit lower to the ground just to see what that kind of looks like. No, I think a little bit higher is a little bit better, because there are some long grasses here that are interfering with the volcano. So we are exposing to the right. Excuse the noises in the background. 15th of a second. And there we go. Beautiful photo. I'll edit it, I'll put it up, let me know what you think, give me some comments. What a beautiful scene. Look at these reeds and these subtle ripples in the water. I really like this. I've actually photographed this location before, this exact composition, and we're going to photograph it again today. So I'm thinking 30mm lens with a polarizer to take off the glare on this water. I've got my tripod here, but I'm not going to use it because I don't need it yet. I've got in-body stabilization. It's perfectly capable of handheld shots in this type of light. When the light gets down a little bit lower, we'll probably use the tripod and we'll do some long exposures. But at the minute, I'm just going to handhold. We are just exploring the location here, trying to work out what the sunset's going to do. We've got some high-level cloud going on. The sun setting is over this direction, so we've got some side light coming on to Mount Tarawera here. I'm hoping there's some more high-level cloud that moves above the volcano. There is quite a lot of high-level cloud just here on my left. Now let's get set up. I'm going to go F11, 10th of a second. I'm just going to put my ISO up to 200. I want to capture the ripples. I don't want any motion in the water here. I'm just going to move a little bit more this way. That's better. A nice, simple, minimal kind of composition. And we're focusing on the reader in the foreground, and with a hyperfocal focusing range, we are getting, we are getting from 3 meters to infinity, which gives me enough depth of field. Yeah, that's quite cool. I'm just going to bring my ISO up a bit to ISO 400, because we're still getting a bit of motion in the water here. And there we go. I put a photo up. Let me know what you think about it. Well, this is a very obvious composition, I think. We've got a bit of a shoreline here, a bit of a curve leading up to some jetties, some boat launches, move out into the water there, and then you've got the volcano on the horizon. So I think it naturally is a wide angle lens shot. So we're going to put the 30mm on and take a photo. And there we go. So we've got the polarizer on here. That's just doing quite a nice job of taking out some of the reflections in the water in the foreground here. And it's revealing some of the lake bed into the photo, which is quite nice. So we are at ISO 400, and we are just focusing on the jetties here. Just want to move a bit more this way. And there we go. Hopefully another beautiful photo. I'll put it up. Let me know what you think about it. So we have just moved our camera here just slightly forward. So instead of having a kind of diagonal line coming from the bottom left up into the centre of the image, which was further back there, just by moving a little bit forward, there's a bit more of a curve in the shoreline here. So we've got a bit of a curve going on now, so it kind of curves in from the bottom left up to these jetties, and the jetties go out into the water, and then behind me you've got the volcano on the horizon there. And I've got my tripod set up now because I'm going to do a long exposure. And we've got a 6-stop filter here. We've already got a polarizer on. Let's give these a bit of a wipe. And yeah, we're just going to do a nice easy long exposure. And we're ISO 160, and we are exposing to the right. That looks good. And we're manual focus here at F16, and we're using the hyperfocal approach because with medium format cameras, they naturally have a shallower depth of field. So to achieve sharpness, acceptable sharpness, and there you've got to really think about how you print your images. But acceptable sharpness for me is from about 2 meters to the horizon, using hyperfocal focusing at f16, and we're just using manual focus here on the Fujifilm GFX 50S2. And Fujifilm obviously thought a lot about this because they've even put on there a depth of field scale for when using manual focus. I mean, it even works in autofocus. So yeah, we've got sharpness from just above 2 meters all the way into infinity, and we're just going to take this photo now, and here we go. It is a 30-second exposure. Yeah, it looks really nice. The water is nice and flat. Yep, and it is sharp front to back. So yeah, if you're a medium format shooter, if you have a digital medium format camera, then to get acceptable sharpness, use the hyperfocal focusing approach. And here we have f/16 hyperfocal, and we've got incredible sharpness, and we can increase sharpness in post-processing if we need to. So yeah, I'll edit them, I'll put them up, let me know what you think and give me some comments. The light's going down now, so we're going to have a bit more of a look around. So we have just moved our composition here further back here. We've got a nice curve running through the bottom of the frame here, and it kind of sweeps in up to the jetties and then out to the volcano. So we've got a polarizer on here. We're at ISO 1, hang on, let me just adjust that, ISO 160, f/16 hyperfocal approach. We've got sharpness from 2 meters out to infinity, and we are just going to make sure we're exposing slightly to the right. 6.5 seconds. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. 2-second timer. Here we go. It's looking beautiful. Nice flat water. So that's it for today's video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I really hope you've learned something. Give me some comments. If you are a camera lens technician or a camera body technician, if you work for a camera manufacturer and you obviously have more engineering nous about cameras than I do, I would really appreciate if you would give some comments about the technicalities of some of the things we've talked about and why medium format cameras are difficult to focus and get sharpness easily. Please leave some comments. And yeah, give me some comments on the photos. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a great day, have a great week. I'll see you next time. Subscribe to the channel. Bye for now.